Nobody commenting, we'll move on. Unification of Europe. Back in the 1950s, there was a move to unite Europe called the Common Market. Don't worry about that so much. The Common Market eventually gave way to the European Union. It's now called the EU, or European Union. To help solidify the Union, they've all adopted a common currency called the euro. And the European Union has taken in a whole bunch of member states that were once a part of the communist system, and your book names several of them. In other words, Romania and the Czech Republic and Slovakia and those countries that once were under part of the Iron Curtain, they also took in Greece, in spite of the fact they knew Greece had economic problems. And it sounded great. The European Union now has a population that is much, much larger than the population of the United States. But their unit of currency, the euro, ran into some problems because they had some weak countries in there, economically weak, mixed with some strong countries. And they were hoping that, well, the strong countries would pull up the weak. Instead, the weak countries pulled down the strong. There are 5 countries known as the PIGS, P-I-I-G-S, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. And they are having severe economic problems that's pulling down the economies of the rest of the countries, and for a while was dragging the euro down. Now, Italy and Greece were told they must get their acts together, and with a lot of rioting, they somewhat have. Here's a problem with Greece. The retirement age is 51, and they want 8 weeks vacation. Folks, this should be obvious. What is wrong with it? Well, in the meantime, their neighbors, the Swiss, took a vote about a year ago, and they voted to, they already had 4 weeks vacation, the Swiss. Now, the Swiss people, being the wise people I've always thought they were, they voted more than 60% against increasing their vacation from 4 weeks to 6. Well, what's wrong with taking a 6-week vacation? And why would the Swiss people, I mean, they did this right when the Greeks were having their problems. What's wrong with it? I mean, keep in mind, unlike our country, their economy is all centrally controlled. It's socialistic. So you give everybody 6 weeks vacation. That means your productivity becomes less, and you're having to pay all these people for the weeks that they're not working. Now, hey, 4 week, I mean, you know, people really are entitled to vacations. Nothing wrong. People might be entitled to changing careers late in life. I don't like the word retirement. My dad lived 11 days after he retired. Dropped over a heart attack. Bear Bryant lived 1 month after he retired. Same thing, heart attack. You retire, your body says it's over, and the body starts to shut down. A lot of people don't live long after they retire. I mean, I knew a lady at Lockheed, I used to work next to her, retired. Within 3 weeks, she was dead. Maybe she knew she wasn't going to last long, but I suspect it's just a mental state of, okay, life's work is over, shut down. But retiring at 51, well, the problem with that is, that's the Greeks. The problem with that is, the people who are working have to feed you while you're not working. Anyway, the Greeks have helped bring down a lot of the rest of Europe's economy. They have set up a European Parliament, and they've set up a full-time presidential post for the European Union, and they're hoping that someday all of Europe will unite into one big super country. They have a space program, and their space program has been involved with helping build the International Space Station, and they were involved in sending a satellite to Saturn. The Cassini-Huygens, the Huygens part was the part that actually landed on Saturn's moon Titan, was built by the European Space Agency. But again, there are problems. Oh yeah, you hear that. I was looking at this list of names. The European Union has taken in Cyprus, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Malta, Poland. You know, some of these countries were actually once, like Latvia, was once part of the Soviet Union itself. And they took in Bulgaria and Romania later, and they could become the world's next superpower if the union was a real, genuine union. And they have worked together to try to solve the problems they're having in the Balkan region, which has been known as the tinderbox, or the fuse that can light up all of Europe. And they have worked together to help resolve the problems in the Balkan region. All right, United States. We're going to go through the United States history really fast here. Just spend about 30 minutes or so on it. Essentially, under the Democrats, more and more socialistic legislation would be passed, and the Republicans generally did not undo it. Now, there was one exception. Richard Nixon undid a lot of Lyndon Johnson's socialistic policies. Anyway, start with Truman. He gave way to Eisenhower. Truman was a Democrat, Eisenhower a Republican. Eisenhower was elected claiming, I'm going to clean up the mess in Washington. He got elected, and he actually did very little. He did not bust up very many bureaucracies and did not curb Social Security. A lot of people feared if the Republicans are elected, Social Security will stop. It didn't. Eisenhower was the first president. I remember he was president when I was a kid, and he might be one of the last presidents who you could say found happiness in the office. Otherwise, the office has tended to bring these men to grief. It has tended to age them. And it used to be it killed them early, but with today's better doctors and better regimen, presidents have lived a long time. But at one time it killed them fairly early. Coolidge only lived 57 years. Roosevelt lived 61 years. And Kennedy lived 46 years, I believe, something like that. Johnson, 64 years. But then after that, they were able to keep their presidents alive longer, I think largely because of better doctors. Eisenhower, when he left office, he was rated as a very mediocre president. But then as time went on, his rating has gotten higher and higher because it's one of the history books this school uses says it's as after we went through Kennedy and Johnson and Nixon and Ford and Carter, people began to think, hey, Eisenhower, things weren't so bad under Eisenhower. He wasn't as bad as he was made out to be. All right. Eisenhower's presidency was later on looked on as being very benign in view of what happened later. With Johnson, you started having a whole bunch of riots. Now, there were some riots in Eisenhower's term, and a lot of the riots in Eisenhower's term were caused by the race issue, which your book will talk about. The race issue had its roots with Harry Truman, you might say. And then it went from Truman to Eisenhower, and there was some racial uprisings during Eisenhower's term. And then they became especially acute under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. Not that these men were at fault, but nevertheless the issue. The racial issue was led by a man named Martin Luther King, who had his headquarters right here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I must say, I mean, my wife has been to the King Center. I have too, and we've taken our children there. We do honor King, and we tell our children, yes, he did have a grievance. There were grievances that needed to be addressed. And a lot of the grievances that were going on at that time have since been curbed. Kennedy, Democrat. John Kennedy was president for less than 3 years, but we still talk about him a lot and still make movies about him. And still people write books about him. He was a very seemingly colorful president. You can say that Kennedy was the first president elected due to the influence of television. That if you look at the photographs of presidents before Kennedy, you get the impression that most of them could never have been elected had there been a color television in those days. Now, one, you might think, what about Franklin Roosevelt? You would not like to see Franklin Roosevelt being carried by a Secret Service man or carried like a small child because he could not walk. Again, he never allowed photographs of that to be taken, and we don't know what it would look like on color TV. But the last painting that was done of Roosevelt shows him to be a picture of health. But if you look at a photograph that was made right about the time the painting was made, the photograph shows a man who looked like he wasn't going to live but a few more days, which he didn't. Again, color television might have shown the country, hey, this man. Well, I'll tell you this story about it. When they told Truman, it's likely you're going to run for president, they felt like Truman should at least go in and visit the man. So Truman went in, visited Roosevelt for a few minutes, and came out and said to one of Roosevelt's top aides, hey, I believe this man's going to last another 4 years. And the top aide said, keep that quiet, just don't say that out loud. We all know that, but you keep that to yourself. And Truman realized, hey, if he doesn't last, guess what? I become president. Anyway, as for Kennedy, now I want to say this. I'm old enough to remember the day Kennedy was elected, and the image we had of him then has turned out to be altogether false. Nothing is what it appeared to be. The man appeared to be a picture of health. In actual reality, he was barely alive. I mean, he was on the verge of death all the time. And he had this quack doctor, we now call him Dr. Feelgood. I don't know what his name is. Dr. Feelgood eventually lost his license. This doctor would pump pain pills into Kennedy every day just to keep him going. But he actually was barely alive. He was pictured as being a man devoted to his wife and family. In actual reality, he was a very, very astute womanizer.
Like his dad.
Like his dad, yeah, okay, like his dad, yes. And unfortunately, what almost destroyed him, one of the women was a woman named Ellen Romsch. And I can spell that name for you if you want to look it up. Ellen Romsch is believed to have been an East German spy. And this could have been grounds for impeachment. Now, I can't prove this, but I know that in 1994 there was a documentary about the assassination that said that the Senate was in session discussing his affair with Ellen Romsch while he was shot. I mean, the Senate was in a super secret session, and it was so super secret they were told don't break in unless an emergency occurs. Well, when the president was shot in the head, that was a big enough emergency where they broke into the secret session. But I heard that they were discussing his affair with this East German woman who may have been a communist spy. Again, that would have been grounds for impeachment if it had been found out. He also had liaison with Marilyn Monroe, both he and his brother. By the way, how many of you have heard of Marilyn Monroe? I know you folks are younger. Okay, now how many of you have heard the story that Robert Kennedy might have been heavily involved in Marilyn Monroe's death? One of you. I mean, okay, two of you, yeah. I'm not saying you don't have to believe it. What we do know, and this is something that I've heard both sides, and both sides admit, Robert Kennedy was at a party 50 miles from Marilyn Monroe's home the night Marilyn Monroe died. Then Robert Kennedy disappeared from the party for 9 hours. Then 9 hours I came back up to the party, and daylight was dawning, but during the night he was gone. He was seen by 9 persons near Marilyn Monroe's apartment, or Marilyn Monroe's home, including 2 police officers saw him. As for Marilyn Monroe, she had a window broken in her home, but the glass from the broken window fell inside. Now, any of you who know anything about breaking windows, in order for the glass to fall inside the house, that means whoever broke the window broke it from the outside. You cannot break a glass from the inside and have it land inside. Well, you can if you use a suction cup. Yeah, it takes some doing. It can be done, but generally. Now, again, I had a student say, well, Marilyn Monroe was bipolar. She attempted suicide many times before, and all this is true. She had all kinds of issues. Why would the Kennedy boys want Marilyn Monroe dead? The story is that she was about to reveal the their liaison, his liaison with the president, her liaison with the president. And the Kennedy, in those days, our country simply was not able to handle that kind of an issue. The fact is, we did not find out anything about John Kennedy's extramarital affairs until 4 years after he died. Again, it was told that everybody in Washington knew about it. The senators, all the senators knew about it, but how come they kept quiet? J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, was afraid of being fired, so Hoover went to John Kennedy and said, hey, I can help you, I can get the Senate off your back. I have this much on this senator, I have that on that senator. Then Hoover went to each senator one at a time. Now folks, this you can find out. But this, and it told the senators, at least 40 of them. Now not all the senators were morally corrupt, but at least 40 of them stayed off his back. I know this on you, I know this on you, I know this on you. And he got the Senate off his back, off John Kennedy's back. The press, in those days, the press knew they had a kind of an unspoken agreement. We're not going to tell. So the press kept quiet.